Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive into one of the absolute most unsettling, yet completely fascinating mysteries of the human brain. We rely on our minds for literally everything. We use them to navigate the world, to figure out who we are, and to keep this ongoing record of our personal histories. But what if the very foundation of those histories is, well, fundamentally flawed? So let me start off by asking you a pretty provocative question. Can you actually trust your own mind? What if I told you that this incredibly detailed mental archive you rely on every single day isn't nearly as rock solid as you think it is? I know, no way, right? It sounds completely impossible to believe. We hold on to these special moments so dearly. But neuroscience is actually showing us that your brain can create memories that feel 100% real, even when they are entirely false. You could vividly remember a conversation, a highly specific event, or even a place from your childhood that simply never existed. And honestly, the absolute craziest part of the whole shebang, you wouldn't even know the difference.
Section 1. Myth versus reality. How memory actually works.
Okay, so most of us walk around kind of believing that our memory works like a video stored on a smartphone, right? We think we just search for a file, hit play, and watch the past unfold exactly as it happened. But actually, scratch that. It is simply not true. Your brain doesn't just hit play on a recording. It actively reconstructs the event every single time you remember it. Every time you recall a moment, you are rebuilding it completely from scratch. And during that reconstruction process, tiny little details can actually change. And eventually, those tiny changes become permanent. The thing you have to understand is that your brain isn't lying to you maliciously. It's really just trying to be super efficient. Instead of storing every single tiny detail of your day, which would take up a massive amount of cognitive energy, it just grabs the most important fragments. When you try to remember the event later, your brain basically scrambles to fill in the missing blanks. And to do this, it quietly pulls in outside information. We're talking photographs you've seen, stories other people have told you, movies, maybe even your own dreams. It all happens completely beneath your conscious awareness, organically overgrowing the original memory like vines twisting around a trellis, until the original structure is just totally hidden.
Section 2. The Mandela Effect. A collective illusion.
Have you ever been absolutely totally certain about a detail from the past, only to discover that millions of other people remember it the exact same incorrect way? Well, this is what we call the Mandela Effect. It happens when massive groups of people confidently remember an event or a specific detail entirely differently than how it actually played out in reality. It's a really wild example of a shared false reality. And we see this pop up constantly in everyday life. People confidently remember brand logos having features they definitely never had, like the Monopoly man having a monocle, which, spoiler alert, he never did, or famous movie quotes being spoken a very specific way, or historical facts playing out differently. So is it just that we all happen to have a terrible memory? Not exactly. Scientists actually believe this happens because human brains share similar tendencies for how we fill in missing information. The brain just naturally weaves in imagination and cultural context to complete the picture, and that results in this collective illusion that feels completely, authentically real to everyone experiencing it.
Section 3. The Memory Doctor. The Research of Elizabeth Loftus.
Let's talk about the absolute powerhouse who basically proved just how fragile our reality really is through decades of rigorous scientific study. Meet psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. She's got a PhD from Stanford and is a distinguished professor working across criminology, law, and psychological science at UC Irvine. But beyond the impressive resume, what she's actually spent her life doing is decisively revealing how facts, external ideas, suggestions, and post-event information can totally and completely modify our existing memories. Through her groundbreaking experiments, she proved something deeply unsettling. She showed that people could be fully convinced they experienced events that were completely fabricated. A real game-changer in this field is one of her most famous studies, known as the shopping mall experiment. This is where she successfully planted the seed of a completely false childhood memory right into the minds of her test subjects. The setup was brilliant because it was just so simple. Researchers introduced a completely fake story to the subjects, suggesting that they had been lost in a shopping mall as kids. Now, at first, subjects might not recall it at all, but with a little suggestion, the brain begins to accept the new story. Just like a weed taking over a lush green garden, the brain accepts the false suggestion, fills in the contextual gaps with its own imagination, and grows it into a fully formed, incredibly vivid memory. Participants didn't just casually agree it happened. They actively generated specific sensory details about this totally fabricated trauma. They were describing the people who found them, how scared they felt, all for an event that literally never occurred. It is just mind-blowing.
Section 4. Real-world consequences. The weight of a memory.
Okay, so we know the brain does this, but why does this matter to you and to society as a whole? Well, think about the legal system. This is a system that relies incredibly heavily on human memory. If memories are so easily fabricated and modified by simple suggestion, what does that mean for justice? Can we truly actually trust eyewitnesses? And right here is the real crux of the issue. Eyewitness testimony isn't always reliable. Two people can witness the exact same event right in front of their own eyes, yet remember it completely differently just weeks or months later. Because memory is constantly shifting, right? Every single time those witnesses are interviewed, every time they see a news report, or every time they just chat with someone else about the event, they are absorbing new post-event information. Their memories literally change shape over time. When they finally take the stand, they aren't lying. They genuinely believe what they are saying, but they are merely reconstructing an event using a heavily altered mental blueprint.
This whole exploration leads us to a pretty profound realization. So I want to leave you with a final thought to kind of chew on today. If our memories can change this easily, if they can be manipulated by simple suggestions, and if our brains are constantly prioritizing efficiency over perfect accuracy, how much of your own reality is exactly as you remember it? How much of your personal history has your brain quietly rewritten without your permission? It turns out, the greatest mystery might not be the universe around us. It's the very mind you're using to understand it.